Terrence Cole was 34 years old and worked nights as an operations supervisor at a distribution warehouse outside Columbus, Ohio. Most people saw a tired blue-collar worker with worn boots, an aging pickup truck, and permanent shadows beneath his eyes. They assumed men like him stayed exactly where they started. What they didn't know was that for 6 years, Terrence had quietly paid for another person's future. The tuition bills, the rent checks, the exam fees. Standing outside a graduation banquet at the Le Méridien Columbus, holding a small gift box in one hand, he heard Dr. Madison Harper raise a champagne glass and smile. "And most of all," she said thank you to Connor Whitmore, the man who stood beside me through everything. The room exploded into applause. Terrence's fingers tightened around the gift box until the cardboard bent inward. "Before we continue, let me know where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel around the world. And if you enjoy stories about quiet people who refuse to be underestimated, subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more waiting behind that ballroom door." 6 years earlier, Terrence Cole had not been thinking about sacrifice. He had been thinking about coffee. The first time he saw Madison Harper, she was sitting alone at a corner table inside River Street Coffee in downtown Columbus. A thick biology textbook was open in front of her. 3 colored highlighters were lined up beside a laptop covered with handwritten notes. Terrence noticed her because she looked frustrated, not angry, not overwhelmed, frustrated, like someone who knew exactly where she wanted to go but hadn't yet figured out how to get there. He was 28 then. She was 25. Terrence had stopped by after a 12-hour shift at Great Lakes Distribution Center on the west side of the city. He wore a gray work jacket with the company logo stitched above the pocket. Madison looked up when he accidentally bumped her chair. "I'm sorry," he said. "No problem." She smiled. It was simple, nothing dramatic, nothing that looked like the beginning of a story that would consume 6 years of his life. 2 weeks later, they met again. Then again. By spring, they were spending weekends together. Terrence liked how ambitious she was. Madison liked how steady he was. Most people talked. Terrence listened. Most people made promises. Terrence showed up. That difference mattered, at least in the beginning. One evening, they sat beside the Scioto River watching the city lights reflect on the water. Madison spoke about medical school, not casually, not as a dream, as a mission. She wanted to become a physician. She wanted to work in emergency medicine. She wanted to be the first doctor in her family. The problem wasn't intelligence. The problem was money. Her student loans would cover some expenses. Not all. She would still need housing, transportation, books, licensing fees, living expenses. The number seemed impossible. Terrence remembered the way she stared at the river when she said it, like someone standing in front of a mountain. "I'll figure it out," she said quietly. Terrence believed she would, but he also knew what struggle looked like. His mother had worked 2 jobs for most of his childhood. His father had disappeared before he turned 10. Nothing had ever come easy. A few weeks later, Madison received her acceptance letter from Ohio State University College of Medicine. She cried before she even finished reading it. Terrence was standing in the kitchen when it happened. She wrapped both arms around him. "We did it. Not I. We." Terrence remembered that word for years afterward. We. That night they celebrated at a small steakhouse near German Village. Madison talked about classes, residency, future plans, a house someday, children maybe, a life together. Terrence listened and smiled. He believed every word. By August, the reality began. Tuition bills arrived, housing deposits arrived, medical equipment fees appeared. Books cost hundreds of dollars, sometimes thousands. Every month seemed to introduce a new expense. Madison worked part-time when she could. It wasn't enough. Medical school consumed nearly every hour of her life. One night, she sat at their kitchen table surrounded by papers. Terrence came home after work around 6 in the morning. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were red. The calculator beside her showed numbers she didn't want to see. "I don't know how we're going to do this." Terrence pulled out a chair. He studied the bills. The silence lasted nearly a minute. Then he asked one question. "How much are we short?" Madison gave him the number. Terrence nodded once. "I'll handle it." She looked up. "You can't." "I can." "No, Terrence, that's too much." He leaned back in his chair. His voice remained calm. "We'll figure it out." Again, we. That became the pattern. Every time a new expense appeared, Terrence found another solution. Overtime, weekend shifts, holiday shifts, double shifts. When other employees complained about working Christmas Eve, Terrence volunteered. When management needed someone on New Year's Day, Terrence volunteered. When snowstorms shut half the city down, Terrence still showed up. His supervisor noticed. Everybody noticed. The warehouse never stopped moving, neither did Terrence. By the second year, he was working nearly 65 hours every week, sometimes more. His alarm clock became a permanent part of his life. Wake up, work, sleep, repeat. Madison often studied while he slept. He often worked while she slept. Days passed when they barely saw each other. But Terrence never complained, because every sacrifice seemed connected to a goal, a future, something larger than himself. He sold his motorcycle during Madison's second year. The motorcycle had been his reward after years of saving. He loved that machine, a black Harley-Davidson Street Bob. The day he sold it, he spent 30 minutes sitting in the empty garage afterward. Then he transferred the money directly toward Madison's expenses. He never mentioned how much that hurt. She never asked. During her third year, Terrence moved them into a smaller apartment. The rent was cheaper. The neighborhood wasn't as nice. The walls were thinner. The parking lot lights flickered at night. But the savings mattered. Every dollar mattered. Terrence tracked everything. Not because he expected repayment, not because he distrusted Madison, because organization was part of who he was. Spreadsheets, receipts, payment confirmations, bank statements, folders, labels, dates, amounts. Every expense had a place. Every payment had a record. The habit came from years of warehouse management. Inventory couldn't disappear. Numbers had to match. The same logic applied to life. At work, Terrence became known for reliability. At home, he became known for sacrifice. His co-workers joked about it. "Man, you're paying for med school yourself," Terrence would laugh. "Feels that way sometimes." But he never sounded bitter, never resentful. Whenever somebody asked why he worked so much, his answer stayed the same. Building something. And he meant it. Because every night inside the warehouse, surrounded by forklifts and loading docks and fluorescent lights, Terrence pictured the future. Madison in a white coat. Madison becoming Dr. Harper. The two of them finally free from financial pressure. The sacrifices would end. The hard years would be over. At least, that's what he believed. What Terrence could not see was that while he was building a future with his hands, another process had already begun. Slow, quiet, almost invisible. The first changes were small enough to ignore, small enough to excuse, small enough to explain away, at first. But those small changes were about to become impossible to miss. The first changes did not arrive like a storm. They arrived like dust. Small enough to ignore, easy enough to explain away. Terrence Cole noticed them one at a time. A canceled dinner, a missed phone call, a forgotten promise. Nothing serious by itself, nothing worth starting an argument over. At least that was what he told himself. The first incident happened during Madison's second semester. For nearly 3 weeks, Terrence had arranged his work schedule around one specific evening, Friday night, a rare night off. He had reserved a table at Lindy's restaurant in German Village. Nothing extravagant, just a chance to spend a few uninterrupted hours together. At 6 o'clock, he was already seated. At 6:15, he checked his phone. No message. At 6:30, her text finally arrived. "Sorry, study group ran late." Rain-checked Terrence stared at the screen. Then he replied, "Of course. Good luck tonight." The server walked over. "Your guest coming?" Terrence smiled politely. "No." He paid for a single meal and left. He never mentioned it again. A month later, it happened again. Different plans, different excuse, same result. Madison always sounded sincere, always tired, always overwhelmed. Medical school was demanding. Terrence knew that. So he accepted every explanation. One evening, around 2 in the morning, he was walking through Warehouse Section C during inventory checks when his phone vibrated. A photo message. Madison had sent a picture from a rooftop gathering near campus. String lights, music, dozens of students, everybody smiling. She looked happy, relaxed, far more relaxed than she ever seemed at home lately. Terrence smiled when he saw the photo. At first. Then he noticed something. She had never mentioned the event, not once. The realization lingered for a few seconds. Then he pushed it aside. Maybe it had been spontaneous. Maybe she forgot. Maybe it wasn't important. The human mind could manufacture excuses faster than facts. Terrence was becoming very good at manufacturing excuses. By her second year, Madison's social circle had changed completely. Most of her closest friends were now future doctors, residents, researchers, medical students from wealthy families. The conversations became different. The restaurants became different. The expectations became different. Terrence noticed because he no longer understood half the stories she told. Not because he lacked intelligence, because he wasn't living in that world. He spent his nights supervising freight deliveries. She spent her days discussing patient cases. The gap between those worlds kept widening. One Saturday afternoon, Madison invited him to a small gathering near campus. Terrence was genuinely excited. It had been months since she had included him in anything connected to school. He arrived carrying a bottle of wine. The apartment was crowded. Students filled every room. Someone opened the door. "Hey," Terrence smiled. "Hi." The student looked confused. "Who are you here with?" "Madison Harper." Recognition appeared. "Oh." The response felt strange. Not rude, just strange. A few minutes later, Madison appeared. Her smile looked forced, not unhappy. Not happy either. Something in between. She introduced Terrence to several classmates. The introductions lasted only seconds. Then something happened. Something small. Something most people would have forgotten immediately. Terrence never forgot it. One of the students asked how they met. Madison hesitated, just briefly. Then she laughed. "Oh, Terrence is an old friend." Friend. The word landed harder than it should have, because they had been living together for nearly 3 years. Because she wore a ring he had bought. Because he was paying half the bills keeping her life together. Friend. The conversation moved on. Nobody noticed. Except Terrence. He remained calm, smiled, participated. But later that night, driving home, the word replayed itself inside his head. Friend, not boyfriend, not fiancé. Friend. When he finally asked about it, Madison barely looked up from her laptop. It wasn't a big deal. Terrence stood beside the kitchen counter. "You introduced me as a friend," she sighed. "You're reading too much into it." "Maybe." "Terrence, these people don't care about relationship labels." He watched her continue typing. Conversation over, case closed, at least from her perspective. The next few months followed the same pattern. Small exclusions, small dismissals, small cuts, never large enough to justify confrontation, never small enough to completely ignore. Then came the white coat ceremony. The event mattered a lot. Medical students received their white coats before beginning clinical training. Families attended. Photos were taken. Speeches were given. It represented years of effort, one of the biggest milestones in a medical student's journey. Terrence knew the date months in advance. He had already arranged time off, already planned dinner afterward, already purchased flowers. 3 days before the ceremony, Madison called. "I only got one guest ticket." Terrence paused. "One? Yeah? Who are you bringing?" "My mom." Terrence nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Okay. You understand, right?" "Of course." He meant it. Her mother absolutely deserved to be there. But something bothered him afterward. Not jealousy, not resentment, confusion. The school auditorium seated hundreds. Terrence found himself wondering whether there had actually been only one ticket, or whether there had been another reason. He never asked. The ceremony happened without him. Madison posted photographs online. Her mother appeared in every picture. Terrence clicked through them late at night during a lunch break. There were classmates, professors, parents, family members, dozens of people. Terrence wasn't in a single image. A man could disappear long before he physically left a room. Terrence was beginning to learn that. The only person who openly questioned what was happening was his older sister, Denise Cole, a registered nurse at Riverside Methodist Hospital. Unlike Terrence, Denise trusted her instincts, and her instincts had started sounding alarms. One Sunday afternoon, she visited their apartment. Madison was studying at the library. Terrence grilled burgers on the balcony. Denise watched him for several minutes. Finally, she spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When was the last time Madison did something for you?" Terrence laughed. "What kind of question is that?" "A serious one." He flipped a burger, thought about it, then realized he couldn't answer immediately. Denise noticed. That was answer enough. "You work 70 hours a week," Terrence shrugged. "Not 70. Close enough. You know why?" "Yeah," Denise said quietly. "I do." The silence stretched. Then she added something he didn't like hearing. "Just make sure you're building a future together." Terrence looked up. "What does that mean?" "It means make sure you're not the only one building." He immediately defended Madison. Medical school, stress, pressure, long hours. Denise listened, then nodded. But the concern never left her eyes. Terrence saw it, ignored it, and continued moving forward, because that was what Terrence did. He moved forward, one shift, one payment, one sacrifice at a time. Then, during Madison's 4th year of medical school, he opened a kitchen drawer looking for a charger. Instead, he found an envelope. Cream-colored, expensive paper, gold lettering, the kind of invitation designed to impress. Terrence pulled it out, read the first line, and felt something cold settle into his stomach. It was an invitation, a graduation banquet, held after commencement, at one of the most prestigious hotels in Columbus. The date was only weeks away, and for the first time in years, Terrence realized there was something Madison had never intended for him to see. Terrence stared at the envelope for nearly 10 seconds before opening it. The apartment was quiet. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic drifted through the room. Madison was still at the university hospital finishing a clinical rotation. Terrence stood alone beneath the kitchen light. The cream-colored envelope felt heavier than paper should. He slid the card out carefully. The lettering was elegant, gold embossed, expensive. Everything about it suggested celebration, success, achievement, a destination finally reached. Terrence began reading. The Ohio State University College of Medicine graduation celebration, grand ballroom, Le Méridien, Columbus, Saturday evening, formal attire, dinner and reception. He read the date twice, then a third time. The event was less than 3 weeks away. His eyes moved down the page, looking for one thing, just one, his name. He never found it. The invitation was addressed specifically to Madison Harper. No guest listed, no +1, no mention of him, nothing. Terrence lowered the card. For a moment he simply stood there, not angry, not yet. The feeling was stranger than anger. It felt like standing outside a house and realizing someone had quietly changed the locks months ago. No dramatic confrontation, no argument. Just the sudden understanding that something had already happened. Something important, something final. He placed the invitation back on the counter, then sat down. The chair creaked beneath him. Terrence looked around the apartment. The same apartment he had helped pay for. The same apartment where he had spent countless mornings returning from night shifts while Madison studied. The same apartment where they had talked about marriage, about children, about buying a house someday. Everything looked familiar, yet somehow different. The invitation sat between them like evidence, not proof of betrayal, proof of exclusion. There was a difference. One hurt more than the other. At 6:30 that evening, Madison came home. She looked exhausted, dark circles beneath her eyes, hospital scrubs, a half-finished energy drink in one hand. Terrence watched her enter, watched her place her bag on the floor, watched her see the invitation on the kitchen table. For the briefest moment, something flashed across her face. Surprise, then concern, then calculation, gone almost instantly. "You found that—" Her voice sounded casual, too casual, Terrence noticed. "Yeah." Madison walked over and picked it up. "I forgot it was there." Terrence nodded. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, he asked, "When were you planning to tell me?" Madison looked away first. "About what?" "The banquet." She sighed, not dramatically, more like someone preparing for an inconvenient conversation. "It's not a big deal." Terrence remained silent. That forced her to continue. "It's mostly for classmates. The invitation says family and guests." Another pause. I just didn't think you'd enjoy it. There it was. Not because he couldn't attend, not because space was limited, not because tickets were unavailable, because she didn't think he would enjoy it. Terrence studied her expression, searching for something, anything, regret, embarrassment, apology. He found none, only impatience. The conversation ended soon afterward. Madison disappeared into the bedroom. Terrence remained in the kitchen, staring at the invitation, thinking. For the first time in years, he stopped explaining things away, stopped manufacturing excuses, stopped protecting Madison from questions she should have answered herself. And once he stopped making excuses, certain details became impossible to ignore. Over the next week, he began noticing things he previously overlooked. Not spying, not investigating, simply observing. One evening, Madison left her laptop open. An email notification appeared. Terrence wasn't trying to read it. The subject line caught his attention anyway. Graduation banquet seating confirmation. Terrence looked away immediately. Then something bothered him. Seating confirmation. Not invitation, confirmation, meaning arrangements had already been finalized. He waited until Madison went to shower. Then he opened his own laptop. Nothing illegal, nothing dishonest, just information. The graduation website listed all public events. The banquet details were included. Guest reservations had closed nearly a month earlier. A month. Terrence leaned back in his chair. Madison had known for weeks, maybe longer. The realization settled heavily, not because she hadn't invited him, because she had deliberately chosen not to. That required planning, preparation, decision-making. You didn't accidentally exclude someone for a month. The following Saturday, Terrence stopped by Denise's house. His sister opened the door and immediately noticed something was wrong. What happened? Terrence handed her the invitation. She read it quietly, then looked up. You're not invited. No. Denise stared at him, waiting. When no explanation came, she asked the obvious question. Did she say why? Terrence gave the answer Madison had provided. Denise laughed once, a sharp laugh without humor. You believe that... Terrence didn't answer, which was answer enough. His sister sat across from him at the kitchen table. You know what worries me. What? You're always trying to understand her choices. Terrence frowned. What does that mean? It means every time she hurts you, you spend more energy explaining her behavior than she spends explaining it herself. The room became quiet, because the statement felt true. Terrence hated that. Denise softened her tone. I'm not telling you what to do. I know. I'm telling you to pay attention. Terrence nodded, then changed the subject, but her words followed him home. Pay attention. For years he had been focused on survival, work, bills, schedules, responsibilities. Now he finally started paying attention, and what he saw made him uncomfortable. Madison's phone suddenly became private. Her stories changed. Her explanations became shorter. Conversations ended faster. Sometimes she seemed annoyed simply by his presence. One night, Terrence came home carrying takeout from her favorite restaurant, Thai Orchid, a small place near campus. Madison barely looked up from her phone. Thanks. That was all. No smile, no conversation, nothing. Terrence sat across from her, watching, not accusing, just observing. Something fundamental had changed. The woman sitting across from him looked like Madison, sounded like Madison, yet increasingly behaved like a stranger. The following week brought another discovery, accidental, simple, devastating. Terrence was organizing paperwork in the home office when he came across a printed event itinerary. Graduation weekend schedule. Several names appeared beneath the banquet seating assignments. Madison Harper, Connor Whitmore, Table 7. Terrence read the names twice. Connor Whitmore. The name wasn't unfamiliar. Madison had mentioned him before. A resident physician. Popular. Well-connected. Came from a wealthy Cincinnati family. Terrence remembered hearing the name during casual conversations. Nothing suspicious, nothing obvious. Until now, Table 7, not just attending, seated together. Terrence placed the paper down, then walked to the window. Outside rain tapped softly against the glass. His reflection stared back. Tired eyes, work jacket, calloused hands. A man who had spent 6 years carrying weight without complaint. For the first time, a question entered his mind. Not whether Madison was changing. That answer was obvious now. The real question was how long it had been happening, and how much he still didn't know. 3 nights before the banquet, Terrence finished a shift shortly after 5 in the morning. The warehouse parking lot was nearly empty. Cold spring air drifted across the asphalt. He sat inside his pickup truck without starting the engine. The invitation rested on the passenger seat. Beside it sat a small gift box he had purchased months earlier. Inside was a silver necklace, simple, elegant, engraved with one phrase, "You did it." Terrence stared at the box, then at the invitation, then back at the box. Eventually he reached a decision. No arguments, no accusations, no dramatic confrontation beforehand. He would attend. Not because he expected gratitude, not because he expected recognition, because after 6 years he wanted to see the truth with his own eyes, whatever that truth turned out to be. 3 days later he opened his closet and removed the only suit he owned. Dark navy, slightly outdated, pressed carefully. Terrence hung it on the bedroom door, then checked the banquet address one final time. Le Méridien, Columbus, Saturday, 7 p.m. Outside the city prepared for celebration. Inside, Terrence prepared for something else entirely. Though he didn't know it yet, the next time he saw Madison Harper on a stage, she would say words neither of them would ever be able to take back. Saturday arrived warm and clear, the kind of spring evening Columbus reserved for postcards and graduation photographs. By 6 o'clock, downtown streets were crowded with families carrying flowers and gift bags. Restaurants were full, hotel lobbies buzzed with celebration. Inside a small apartment 15 minutes away, Terrence Cole stood in front of a bathroom mirror, adjusting a navy blue tie. The suit fit well enough. Not perfectly. He had purchased it 4 years earlier for a cousin's wedding. Back then, Madison had helped him choose it. She said the color made him look distinguished. The memory surfaced unexpectedly, then disappeared. Terrence tightened the knot, picked up the small gift box from the dresser, and left. His pickup truck looked out of place among the luxury vehicles parked outside Le Méridien, Columbus. BMWs, Mercedes, Range Rovers, a few Porsches. The hotel entrance glowed beneath warm golden lighting. Valets moved efficiently between arriving guests. Women in evening dresses crossed the lobby. Men in tailored suits laughed beside marble columns. Terrence parked in a public garage 2 blocks away. Not because he couldn't afford valet service, because old habits were difficult to break. He preferred saving money, always had. As he walked toward the hotel entrance, the gift box rested inside his jacket pocket. Light, small, almost weightless, yet somehow heavier than anything he had carried all week. Inside the lobby, nobody questioned him. Nobody stopped him. Nobody asked for an invitation. He blended into the crowd, just another guest attending another celebration. The ballroom entrance stood open. Soft music drifted into the hallway. Terrence paused for a moment, then stepped inside. The room was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead. Round tables covered with white linen stretched across the ballroom. Elegant centerpieces reflected warm light. Servers moved quietly between guests carrying trays of champagne. A stage stood at the far end of the room. 2 large screens displayed photographs from medical school. Graduation portraits, clinical rotations, research projects, white coats, smiling faces, future doctors. Terrence remained near the back, observing, listening. The narrator of his own life had become an audience member. Madison appeared on one of the screens, then another, then another. Her smile seemed effortless, confident, polished, successful. The same woman who once cried over tuition bills now stood on the edge of becoming Dr. Madison Harper. Terrence felt something unexpected. Pride. Despite everything, despite the distance, despite the questions, despite the invitation that never came, he still felt proud, because much of what surrounded her tonight had been built through years of sacrifice. His sacrifice, not exclusively, but undeniably. The realization brought neither satisfaction nor bitterness, only truth. Then Terrence noticed Connor Whitmore. The man stood near the stage speaking with several guests, tall, well-dressed, comfortable, the kind of confidence often inherited rather than earned. Terrence studied him quietly. Not with jealousy, not with anger, simply curiosity. Connor looked exactly like the kind of person Madison's newer social circle admired. Polished, connected, successful, a physician. The two men had never formally met, yet Terrence immediately understood why Connor mattered. Several minutes later, Madison entered the ballroom. Conversation softened, heads turned. She wore a dark emerald dress that matched her eyes. The graduation stole draped elegantly across her shoulders. People greeted her constantly, classmates, professors, families. She smiled for photographs, accepted congratulations, moved effortlessly through the room. Terrence watched from a distance, waiting, not expecting recognition, just watching. Madison never looked his direction, not once. At 7:30, dinner began. At 8:15, speeches followed. A dean spoke first. Then several faculty members. Then a student representative. Finally, Madison approached the podium. The ballroom applauded. Terrence felt his heartbeat slow, not accelerate, slow, as though some part of him already understood what was coming. Madison adjusted the microphone, smiled, and began speaking. She thanked professors, faculty mentors, classmates, hospital staff, her mother, her father, her grandparents. Every name received applause. Terrence listened carefully, still calm, still patient, still waiting. Perhaps she would mention him later. Perhaps she had simply chosen a different order. The speech continued. Several minutes passed. Then Madison smiled toward a specific table. Table 7, Connor's table. Her voice softened. Emotion entered it. Genuine emotion. The room grew quieter. And finally, she said, "I want to thank someone who carried me through the hardest years of my life." Applause began immediately. Madison looked directly at Connor. "My rock." More applause. Connor smiled modestly. Terrence didn't move, didn't blink, didn't react, not outwardly. Inside, however, something shifted, not shattered, shifted. A final piece sliding into place. Madison continued. "Connor believed in me when I doubted myself. He supported me when things became impossible, and he reminded me every day why this journey mattered." The ballroom erupted again. People stood, some even cheered. Connor rose from his seat. Madison walked down from the stage and embraced him. Photographers rushed forward. Cameras flashed. Guests applauded harder. Terrence remained at the back of the room, motionless. His hand rested inside his jacket pocket, fingers touching the small gift box. The silver necklace suddenly felt ridiculous, not because of its cost, because of its meaning. You did it. The words had been engraved for a woman who no longer seemed interested in remembering how she got there. Terrence watched the applause continue. 10 seconds, 20, 30, long enough for reality to settle completely. There would be no surprise acknowledgement, no forgotten thank you, no explanation, no correction. The speech wasn't missing his name. The speech had intentionally excluded it. The distinction mattered. One was oversight, the other was choice. Terrence understood that now. As guests returned to their seats, a server approached him. Young, polite, clearly busy. "Excuse me, sir." Terrence looked up. The server smiled. "Are you with hotel security?" The question wasn't malicious. The young man simply assumed. Dark suit, serious expression, standing alone near the wall. Terrence probably looked more like staff than family. For a second, neither spoke. Then Terrence smiled faintly. "No." The server looked embarrassed. "Oh, sorry. It's okay." The young man hurried away. The exchange lasted less than 10 seconds, yet somehow it summarized the entire evening. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody knew why he was there. Nobody knew how many overnight shifts had paid for textbooks, rent checks, licensing fees, examination costs, parking permits, groceries, and countless emergencies. Because people only saw the final chapter, not the pages that came before. The applause eventually faded. Dinner resumed. Music returned. Conversations restarted. The celebration moved forward. Terrence remained where he was, watching, listening, thinking. For years he had feared discovering the truth. Now the truth stood illuminated beneath crystal chandeliers. And strangely, it hurt less than uncertainty. Uncertainty asks questions. Truth provides answers, even painful ones. Across the ballroom, Madison laughed beside Connor. Photographers gathered around them again. Another picture, another memory, another carefully curated moment. Terrence slipped the gift box from his pocket, turned it over once, then closed his hand around it. He could leave now, drive home, never speak about tonight again. But another thought entered his mind, a simple one. For 6 years he had accepted distance, accepted explanations, accepted exclusion. Tonight, for the first time, he wanted answers directly from Madison herself. Not tomorrow, not next week. Tonight. Terrence straightened his jacket, took a slow breath, and began walking toward table 7. Terrence moved through the ballroom slowly, not because he was nervous, because there was no reason to rush. The answers he wanted had already revealed themselves. What remained was confirmation. Nothing more. Around him, guests laughed over dessert and champagne. Conversations blended together beneath soft jazz music. Crystal glasses reflected chandelier light across white tablecloths. The celebration continued, for everyone except Terrence. As he approached table 7, Madison was speaking with 2 professors. Connor Whitmore stood beside her, one hand casually resting in his pocket, smiling for photographs. Terrence stopped several feet away, waiting, not interrupting, not forcing attention onto himself. Eventually Madison turned. For a split second she froze. The reaction was impossible to miss. Her smile disappeared. Her shoulders stiffened. Color drained slightly from her face. Terrence noticed every detail. Because unlike the speech, this reaction looked genuine. Terrence. His name sounded almost foreign coming from her now. Several people at the table glanced between them. Connor followed her gaze. The resident physician studied Terrence briefly, trying to place him, trying to understand why Madison suddenly looked uncomfortable. Terrence spoke calmly. "Congratulations." He removed the small gift box from his jacket pocket. "I wanted to give you this." Madison stared at the box, then at him. The moment stretched. People nearby pretended not to watch. They watched anyway. "Thank you," she finally said. But she didn't take the gift, not immediately. Terrence noticed that, too. Eventually, she accepted it, holding it awkwardly, as if it were evidence she didn't want photographed. Connor stepped forward, polite, professional, the kind of smile people practiced. "I'm Connor." Terrence nodded. "Terrence Cole." Connor extended his hand. Terrence shook it, firm, brief, nothing hostile, nothing friendly either, just 2 men acknowledging each other. Then Connor asked the question, "So how do you know Madison?" The words hung in the air. Simple question, complicated answer. Terrence looked at Madison. She looked back. For a moment neither spoke. Terrence realized she was waiting to hear how he would define himself. Boyfriend, fiancé, partner, former partner, friend. The choice belonged to him, yet strangely he no longer cared. "We've known each other a long time," Connor nodded, apparently satisfied. Madison looked relieved. That bothered Terrence more than anything else. Not the speech, not the banquet, the relief. Because relief suggested fear. Fear suggested something worth hiding. One of the professors excused himself. Then another. Gradually, the crowd surrounding the table drifted away. Within minutes, only 4 people remained: Madison, Connor, Terrence, and silence. Finally, Madison spoke. "What are you doing here?" The question landed harder than she intended. Terrence noticed Connor glance toward her. He noticed because the wording sounded wrong. Not, "I'm surprised to see you." Not, "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" Not, "I'm glad you're here." Instead, "What are you doing here?" As if his presence required justification. Terrence kept his voice level. "I came to celebrate." Madison crossed her arms. "You should have told me." Terrence almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, because the statement felt absurd. "I didn't know I needed permission." Connor looked uncomfortable now. The conversation was no longer fitting neatly into whatever version of reality he understood. Madison lowered her voice. "Can we not do this tonight?" "Do what?" Her jaw tightened. "This." Terrence waited. She never clarified. Because there was nothing to clarify. He wasn't raising his voice, wasn't accusing her, wasn't creating a scene. He was simply standing there, and somehow that alone seemed to bother her. Connor attempted diplomacy. "Maybe we can all grab coffee sometime." Terrence glanced toward him. The offer sounded sincere, which made it almost painful. Connor clearly didn't understand the situation. "Not yet." "Maybe?" Terrence replied. Then Madison said something she would later regret. Not because it was cruel, because it was revealing. One careless sentence, the kind that exposes years of hidden truth. A nearby guest congratulated Madison as he passed. The man smiled and gestured toward Terrence. "Family." Madison hesitated, again. That familiar hesitation. Then she answered, "No, just someone who helped out a little along the way." Helped out a little. The words were soft, almost casual, but Terrence heard them clearly. So did Connor. So did several people nearby. Just someone who helped out a little. 6 years, thousands of night shifts, a motorcycle sold, vacations skipped, holidays worked, rent payments, insurance payments, exam fees, tuition support. Years of sacrifice compressed into 6 words, helped out a little. Terrence felt something inside him become very still, not angry, not emotional. Still, like water freezing. The sentence explained everything. Because Madison genuinely believed it. That was the important part. This wasn't performance. This wasn't a public relations strategy. She believed her own version of the story. And that realization changed something fundamental. For years, Terrence had wondered whether Madison understood what he had given. Now he knew. She understood. She simply didn't value it. The distinction mattered. Connor shifted awkwardly, the tension finally becoming impossible to ignore. "Madison." She immediately recognized she had said too much. Too late. The sentence already existed, spoken, heard, real. Terrence looked at her calmly. "You really see it that way?" Madison sighed. "Terrence, don't make this dramatic." Again, the same pattern. The issue wasn't her words. The issue was his reaction. The problem wasn't what happened. The problem was noticing it. Terrence nodded slowly. "I understand." For the first time all evening, he meant those words completely. He did understand. More than she realized. Madison relaxed slightly, mistaking acceptance for surrender, mistaking calmness for weakness, a mistake many people would soon make. Terrence reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, looked at the screen briefly. Not texting, not calling anyone, just checking that a recording application remained active. His thumb tapped the screen once. Save. The file stored automatically. A simple habit. Nothing unusual. At least not for someone who spent years documenting everything. The conversation continued another minute, mostly meaningless small talk. Then Terrence stepped back. "I'll let you get back to your guests." Madison looked relieved again. Connor offered a polite nod. "Nice meeting you." "You too." Terrence turned and walked away. No confrontation, no accusations, no emotional speech. Nothing the ballroom could gossip about tomorrow. The absence of drama confused people. A few guests watched him leave, expecting an explosion, expecting anger, expecting humiliation. Instead, they received silence. Because silence often frightened people more than shouting, especially when they didn't understand what came next. Outside the ballroom, Terrence walked through the hotel lobby, past marble floors, past the front desk, past groups of laughing families taking photographs. The city air felt cool against his skin when he stepped outside. He stood on the sidewalk for several moments, breathing, thinking, processing. Traffic moved steadily through downtown Columbus. A siren echoed somewhere in the distance. Life continued, unaware, uninterested. Terrence reached into his pocket and removed his phone again. The recording was there, time-stamped, stored, protected. He listened to one short section, Madison's voice, clear, undeniable. Just someone who helped out a little. Terrence stopped the playback. Not because he needed to hear more, because he had already heard enough. The statement itself meant very little. The context behind it meant everything. As he walked toward the parking garage, another realization surfaced. For years, he had been protecting the relationship, protecting Madison, protecting the future he imagined. Tonight, that responsibility ended. Not through anger, not through revenge, through clarity. By the time Terrence reached his pickup truck, dawn felt closer than midnight. Not literally, emotionally. The darkness of uncertainty had finally lifted. Painful truth was still truth, and truth gave direction. He started the engine, drove home through quiet streets, and shortly before sunrise, he unlocked the apartment door. Inside a filing cabinet in the spare bedroom sat a black binder. Terrence had not opened it in months. He walked directly toward it, because for the first time the records inside were no longer memories. They were evidence. The apartment was silent when Terrence arrived home. Sunrise had not yet reached Columbus. Gray morning light leaked through the blinds in thin stripes. For years, Terrence had entered this apartment exhausted. Tonight he entered awake. Pain had a way of defeating fatigue. He locked the door behind him, removed his jacket, placed his keys on the kitchen counter, then walked directly toward the spare bedroom. The room served several purposes: home office, storage space, bill-paying station. Most people would have called it cluttered. Terrence called it organized. A metal filing cabinet stood against one wall. 3 drawers, black, unremarkable. Inside sat 6 years of records. He pulled open the bottom drawer, reached inside, and removed a thick black binder. The label was simple: Harper Education. Terrence carried it to the desk, sat down, opened the cover. For several moments he simply looked, not reading, remembering. Every page represented a choice. Every document represented a sacrifice. The first section contained tuition records, semester after semester, year after year, printed payment confirmations, electronic transfers, receipts, amounts, dates, everything neatly arranged. Terrence flipped through them slowly. The numbers accumulated quickly. $5,000, $8,000, $3,000, $1,200, another $4,000. Some payments came directly from Madison's loans. Others came from Terrence's savings. Many came from overtime earnings. Each page told the same story: support, partnership, investment, belief. Nothing about those pages looked small. Nothing resembled helping out a little. Terrence continued. Housing expenses, lease agreements, utility payments, security deposits, medical insurance premiums, parking permits, licensing fees, board preparation courses, textbooks, clinical equipment, examination registration costs. The binder grew thicker with every section. Terrence remembered each moment. The emergency car repair during Madison's 2nd year, the broken transmission he paid for because she couldn't afford to miss hospital rotations, the apartment flood that forced them to relocate temporarily, the licensing exam fee that appeared unexpectedly, the specialized textbooks costing hundreds of dollars each. Whenever a crisis appeared, Terrence found a solution. Not because he enjoyed sacrifice, because he believed they were building something together. The memory made him pause. Building, that word again. For years he had repeated it. Building a future, building stability, building a family. Yet now he sat alone, reviewing documents while Madison celebrated another man. The contrast felt almost absurd. Terrence closed his eyes briefly, then kept turning pages. Emotion could wait. Facts came first. Facts always came first. Around 7:30 in the morning, he found a section labeled Correspondence. Emails, text messages, written agreements, conversations preserved digitally. Terrence rarely deleted anything important. The habit came from warehouse operations. Records mattered, documentation mattered, proof mattered. One email caught his attention immediately, sent nearly 5 years earlier. Madison had been struggling through her first difficult semester. The message was short, emotional, written late at night. Terrence read it carefully. I don't know what I would do without you. Everything I'm accomplishing is because we're doing this together. He stared at the sentence, then continued reading. Someday, when I'm Dr. Harper, we're going to look back and laugh about how hard this was. We're investing in our future, not hers, ours. The distinction mattered. Another email, another message, another promise. The language repeated itself constantly. together, we, us, future, partnership, marriage, family. Every written record told the same story Madison no longer seemed willing to acknowledge publicly. At 9 o'clock, Terrence made coffee, strong, black, no sugar. He carried the mug back to the desk and continued reviewing documents. Hours passed. The binder revealed details he had almost forgotten. Receipts from extra shifts worked during snowstorms. Transfer confirmations sent after midnight. Payments made directly to university accounts. Each document strengthened something Terrence had begun realizing after the banquet. This wasn't merely a failed relationship. It was a factual record, a measurable record, a documented record, and documentation changed everything. Near noon, he reached the final section, a thin collection of papers stored inside protective sleeves. Terrence stopped. His expression changed. This section mattered more than any other, because unlike emails or receipts, these pages carried signatures, actual signatures. Years earlier, during Madison's second year of medical school, a conversation about finances had led to a practical decision. Neither of them had considered it controversial. At the time, it felt responsible, adult, reasonable. Madison worried about the growing amount of money Terrence contributed. Terrence worried about keeping financial records organized. The solution had been simple. A written agreement, not complicated, not hostile, not created because either person expected failure. The document stated that if their relationship ended before marriage, Madison would reimburse certain documented educational expenses over time, according to a mutually agreed repayment schedule. The purpose wasn't punishment, protection, for both sides. Madison herself had suggested putting things in writing. Terrence remembered the conversation clearly. They had laughed while signing it. Neither believed it would ever matter. People in love rarely imagine legal documents becoming important. Yet there it was. Black ink, Madison Harper's signature, Terrence Cole's signature, witnessed, dated, stored, forgotten. Until now. Terrence read the agreement twice, then a third time, not because he doubted it, because he finally understood its significance. For years, the document had existed quietly in the background. Now it stood at the center of everything. His phone buzzed. The screen displayed Madison's name. Terrence stared at it. The call went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, she called again. He let that call go too. Then a text arrived. "We need to talk." Terrence looked at the message. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement, just a demand. "We need to talk." He placed the phone face down on the desk. The timing interested him, not the content, because Madison had shown little interest in talking for months. Yet after the banquet, suddenly conversation became urgent. Terrence suspected why. People became eager to communicate when control started slipping away. The phone buzzed again. Another text. "Why were you there?" Terrence almost smiled. Still the same question. Why were you there? Not how are you feeling, not can we fix this? Not I'm sorry, just concern about his presence, concern about what he had seen, concern about what he now knew. The distinction mattered. Terrence ignored the message. Instead, he picked up another document, a spreadsheet, his master spreadsheet. 6 years of financial records summarized in one place, rows, columns, dates, amounts, categories, thousands of entries. Terrence began reviewing totals. The final number surprised even him. Not because he didn't know the amount, because he had never seen everything added together at once. The figure represented years of labor, years of missed sleep, years of overtime, years of believing in someone else's dream. The amount sat quietly on the screen, objective, emotionless, powerful. By late afternoon, Terrence had reached a conclusion. Not an emotional conclusion, a practical one. This situation had moved beyond personal conversations, beyond explanations, beyond promises. Too much documentation existed, too much history existed, too many facts existed. Facts required professional handling. There was only one logical next step. Legal advice, nothing aggressive, nothing reckless, just information, guidance, options. Terrence opened his laptop, typed a name into the search bar. Marcus Bennett, civil litigation attorney, downtown Columbus, former military officer, highly respected. a man known for preparation rather than theatrics. Terrence had heard of him years earlier through a warehouse co-worker. He clicked the website, read quietly, then picked up his phone. The call lasted less than 4 minutes. An assistant answered, asked several questions, scheduled a consultation, Tuesday morning, 10 o'clock. Terrence wrote the appointment into his calendar, then closed the binder. The sound echoed softly through the room. For the first time since the banquet, a sense of direction replaced uncertainty. Not victory, not revenge, direction. Outside the window, afternoon sunlight stretched across the city. Traffic moved through nearby streets. Life continued, ordinary, unaware. Inside the apartment, the black binder sat on the desk, no longer a collection of memories, no longer a symbol of sacrifice. Now it had become something else, something much more dangerous, evidence. Tuesday morning arrived cold and gray. Rain drifted across downtown Columbus in thin sheets, turning sidewalks reflective and slick. Terrence Cole parked his truck 3 blocks from Marcus Bennett's office. Old habits. Parking garages charged $20. Street parking cost $2. Terrence chose the $2 option. Even now, even after everything, he still thought in numbers. The office occupied the 7th floor of a brick building overlooking Broad Street. Nothing flashy, no marble lobby, no oversized logos, no unnecessary luxury. Terrence appreciated that immediately. The reception area looked efficient rather than impressive. A receptionist greeted him, asked for his name, then directed him toward a conference room. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door opened. Marcus Bennett entered. 52 years old, former Army officer, broad shoulders, silver hair, calm eyes, the kind of man who appeared impossible to surprise. Marcus shook Terrence's hand, firm, professional. Then he sat. Terrence placed the black binder on the table. Marcus looked at it, then at Terrence. "What's it?" Terrence answered honestly. 6 years. The attorney smiled faintly. "Let's start there." For the next 90 minutes, Terrence spoke. Not emotionally, not dramatically, simply chronologically. How he met Madison, how she entered medical school, how financial support gradually increased, how expenses accumulated, how promises were made, how the relationship changed, how the graduation banquet unfolded, how Madison publicly minimized his contribution. Marcus listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes, occasionally asking questions, always precise, never rushed. When Terrence finished, silence settled over the room. Marcus opened the binder. The attorney's expression remained neutral as he reviewed the first section. Tuition payments, transfer records, housing expenses, insurance records, exam fees. The pages continued, and continued, and continued. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Marcus eventually removed his reading glasses, leaned back, and looked directly at Terrence. "Did you organize all this yourself?" "Yes." "Every page?" "Yes." The attorney nodded slowly. Then opened the binder again. He reviewed another section. More receipts, more records, more documentation. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Most people come into this office with stories." Terrence remained silent. Marcus tapped the binder. "You came with evidence." The distinction mattered. Both men understood that. Stories invited debate. Evidence invited verification. Marcus continued reading, then reached the signed repayment agreement. The attorney stopped. Read the document carefully, then read it again. A third time. Only then did he look up. "She signed this voluntarily?" "Yes." "Witnessed?" "Yes." "No pressure?" "No." Marcus nodded. A long silence followed. Terrence knew enough about professionals to recognize evaluation when he saw it. The attorney wasn't deciding whether the situation was unfortunate. He was deciding whether it was actionable. Those were different questions. Eventually, Marcus closed the binder. "What outcome are you looking for?" Terrence considered the question carefully. The answer mattered, more than any document, more than any receipt, because motivation often determined strategy. "I don't want revenge." Marcus watched him closely. "I don't want to embarrass her." The attorney said nothing. "I don't want social media fights." Still silence. Terrence continued. "I want facts acknowledged." Marcus nodded once. "Anything else?" Terrence looked toward the window. Rain slid slowly down the glass. I don't want 6 years rewritten. The room became quiet, because that sentence reached the center of everything. Money mattered, certainly. But money wasn't the true issue. The real issue was narrative, history, truth. A person could survive financial loss. What became harder was watching reality rewritten in real time. Watching sacrifice reclassified as something insignificant. Watching documented facts become inconvenient memories. Marcus seemed to understand immediately. That's reasonable. Terrence exhaled slowly. The attorney folded his hands. Let me explain where things stand. For the next half hour, Marcus walked through possible legal paths: contract enforcement, financial recovery, civil remedies, documentation requirements, discovery procedures, evidence preservation. Terrence listened carefully. The language felt unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting, because every process followed structure, rules, standards, verification, facts. Unlike public opinion, legal systems cared about documentation, and documentation was the one thing Terrence possessed in abundance. Marcus eventually reached a conclusion, a simple one. You have a stronger position than most people in situations like this. Terrence frowned slightly. Why? The attorney almost laughed, then tapped the binder again. Because most people trust memories. He tapped the pages. You trusted records. The meeting ended shortly after noon. Before leaving, Marcus provided a checklist: additional documents, bank statements, electronic communications, financial summaries. Terrence already possessed nearly everything requested. The attorney seemed impressed by that. Not emotionally impressed, professionally impressed. As Terrence gathered his materials, Marcus offered one final piece of advice. You're about to discover something. Terrence paused. What? Marcus leaned back. The moment documentation appears, people's stories tend to change. The statement lingered. Then Marcus added something else. Don't argue online. Terrence almost smiled. I wasn't planning to. Good. The attorney stood. Because facts work better when they're not competing with emotions. Outside, the rain had intensified. Terrence carried the binder back to his truck. The city looked different now, not because Columbus had changed, because uncertainty had. For months, perhaps years, questions dominated his thinking. Now questions were being replaced by procedures, next steps, action items, structure. The difference felt surprisingly calming. That evening, Terrence returned home. The apartment remained quiet. Madison was spending increasing amounts of time elsewhere. Hospital rotations, graduation celebrations, friends, Connor. Terrence no longer asked, no longer investigated, no longer chased explanations. Instead, he sat at the dining table organizing requested materials. The process consumed hours: additional statements, payment confirmations, archived emails, loan records, expense summaries. Every file received a label. Every folder received a date. Around 8:30, his phone vibrated. Madison again. A text message. We need to figure out where things stand. Terrence read it twice. Interesting. Not, how are you? Not, can we talk, not. I'm sorry. Instead, we need to figure out where things stand. Practical language, cautious language. The wording sounded almost strategic. Terrence didn't respond. 5 minutes later, another message arrived. Are you ignoring me? Still no response. Then, Connor said you seemed upset Saturday. Terrence stared at the screen. The irony nearly made him laugh. Seemed upset. After 6 years, after public erasure, after being reduced to someone who helped out a little, upset felt like a remarkably small word. He set the phone aside and returned to organizing documents. Near midnight, another realization surfaced. For years, he had invested energy into protecting Madison's image, explaining her behavior, defending her choices, minimizing her actions. That habit had disappeared, not intentionally, naturally, like a muscle finally relaxing after carrying weight too long. The next morning, Marcus called. Brief conversation, efficient, professional. The attorney's office had completed an initial review. The recommendation was straightforward. Prepare a formal demand package, present documented figures, present supporting evidence, allow Madison an opportunity to respond. Nothing aggressive, nothing theatrical, simply facts. Terrence agreed. The process began immediately. Over the next several days, financial summaries were refined, supporting exhibits organized, calculations verified, everything prepared carefully, because Marcus believed in precision, and Terrence believed in preparation. Together, those qualities created something powerful. By Friday afternoon, the package was complete. A thick document containing years of evidence, years of numbers, years of proof. Marcus reviewed the final version one last time, then looked across his desk. Ready. Terrence considered the question, thought about the banquet, the speech, the recording, the binder, the 6 years behind him. Then he nodded. Yes. Marcus signed several pages, placed the documents into a large envelope, and slid it across the desk toward his assistant. The envelope looked ordinary, plain, unremarkable, yet both men understood its significance, because once it entered the mail system, everything would change. For years, Madison Harper had controlled the story. Soon she would be forced to confront the record, and records rarely cared about feelings. The certified envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning. Terrence never saw the delivery, but Marcus Bennett did. Because the law firm tracked everything: signature confirmation, delivery timestamp, receipt verification, documentation, the same language Terrence had spoken for years without realizing it. By 11:30 that morning, Dr. Madison Harper signed for the package. By 11:42, Marcus received confirmation. By noon, everything changed. Terrence was halfway through an inventory review at Great Lakes Distribution Center when his phone vibrated. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. Terrence stepped away from the loading dock noise before answering. Everything okay? It was delivered. Terrence nodded, even though Marcus couldn't see him. And now we wait. The attorney sounded calm, almost relaxed. Terrence appreciated that, because waiting had become one of his strongest skills. Years of night shifts taught patience. Years of supporting someone else's future taught patience. Years of swallowing disappointment taught patience. He could wait. The real question was whether Madison could. The answer arrived faster than expected. At 2:17 p.m., Terrence's phone exploded with notifications. 3 calls, 4 text messages, then another call. Madison. He ignored them all, not out of spite, because Marcus had been clear. No direct discussions, no emotional conversations, no informal negotiations. Everything through counsel, everything documented, everything controlled. The messages continued. What is this? Call me. Terrence, answer your phone. This is ridiculous. We need to talk now. Terrence looked at the screen, then locked it again. Back inside the warehouse, forklifts continued moving pallets across concrete floors. Employees continued loading trailers. Schedules continued running. The world remained indifferent to personal drama. Terrence liked that. Reality often felt cleaner than emotions. That evening, he arrived home shortly after 6. The apartment felt different now, not empty, divided. Madison's belongings remained throughout the space. Shoes by the door, medical books on shelves, photographs on walls, yet the apartment no longer felt shared. It felt temporary, like a hotel room occupied by 2 strangers. Madison was waiting when he entered, standing beside the kitchen counter, holding papers, the demand package. Terrence immediately recognized it. Her face revealed something he had not seen in a long time. Not anger, fear, real fear. What is this? Terrence placed his keys down calmly. You have an attorney. She laughed sharply, disbelief mixed with panic. Are you serious? Terrence said nothing. Madison held up the packet. This can't be serious. It is. The room became silent. For years, Terrence would have rushed to calm her, explain himself, reduce tension, protect her emotions. That instinct was gone. Not because he hated her, because clarity had replaced confusion. Madison stepped closer. You're actually trying to charge me for helping me. Terrence noticed the wording immediately. Helping, not funding, not supporting. Helping. Language mattered. It always did. I didn't write the letter. You approved it? Yes. Madison stared at him, searching for something. Weakness, perhaps. Hesitation. Guilt. Instead, she found calmness. That seemed to frustrate her more than anger would have. This is unbelievable. Terrence remained silent. She began flipping through pages, The figures, the spreadsheets, the supporting records, the totals. Every page carried dates and documentation. Every page reduced memory to evidence. Madison's voice rose. "You're counting everything." "Everything documented." The answer only intensified her frustration. "You kept records of all this?" "Yes." "Why?" Terrence almost smiled. The question revealed more than she intended. Why keep records? Because records mattered. Because details mattered. Because facts mattered. Yet somehow those answers surprised her. For the first time, Madison seemed to understand something fundamental about the man standing before her. He had never been careless, never disorganized, never inattentive. The quiet warehouse supervisor she underestimated had spent 6 years preserving every relevant detail. The realization visibly unsettled her. "You planned this?" Terrence shook his head. "No." "Then why keep all this?" "Because that's what I do." Another silence. Madison looked back down at the documents. Terrence could almost see the calculations happening behind her eyes. Not financial calculations, risk calculations. The package represented something she hadn't anticipated. Proof. The most dangerous thing in any dispute wasn't anger. It was proof. Without proof, people argued. With proof, people explained. And explanations tended to change. Madison left the apartment shortly afterward. The demand package under her arm, her phone already pressed against her ear. Calling someone, probably Connor, possibly an attorney, maybe both. Terrence didn't care. The process had begun. The next phase belonged to facts. 3 days later, social media entered the story. Not unexpectedly. Marcus had predicted it. The moment people feel pressure, the attorney had said, they start building narratives. The prediction proved accurate. Saturday morning, Madison posted a lengthy message online. Graduation photographs accompanied it. Professional images, beautiful images, carefully selected images. The caption told a story, a specific story, a strategic story. Madison described years of struggle, years of sacrifice, years of perseverance. Nothing wrong with that. Those parts were true. Then came the subtle shift, the implication, the suggestion, the carefully constructed omission. She described overcoming obstacles without support, finding strength within herself, escaping unhealthy influences, learning independence, growing beyond people who doubted her. Terrence read the post once, then again. The language never mentioned him directly. It didn't need to. The target was obvious. Thousands of words could lie without technically becoming false. All they had to do was leave things out. Within hours, comments appeared. "Congratulations. You're inspiring. So proud of you. You did it all on your own." The last comment caught Terrence's attention, not because Madison wrote it, because she liked it. A small action, one click, yet revealing. "You did it all on your own." Like. Terrence stared at the screen briefly, then closed the application. The post wasn't evidence. The post wasn't reality. The post was marketing. And marketing only worked when facts remained hidden. Unfortunately for Madison, facts no longer remained hidden. By Sunday afternoon, mutual acquaintances began contacting Terrence. Some genuinely curious, others less charitable. One former friend sent a text. "Man, I heard you've been harassing Madison." Another wrote, "Didn't think you were that controlling." A third message arrived, "You should just move on." Terrence read them all, responded to none, because every response would become another conversation, another argument, another opportunity for distortion. Marcus had advised against that. More importantly, Terrence agreed with that. The truth did not become stronger through repetition. The truth became stronger through verification. Monday morning brought another development. One of Terrence's co-workers approached him during break. "Everything okay?" Terrence looked up. "What do you mean?" The man hesitated. "I saw something online." Of course, social media traveled faster than facts, always had. Terrence took a sip of coffee. "I'm fine." The co-worker nodded, then added something unexpected. "For what it's worth, I've worked beside you 7 years. Terrence waited. The man shrugged. "People who know you aren't buying that story." Then he walked away. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds, yet it stayed with Terrence all day, because it reminded him of something important. Narratives mattered, but reputation mattered too, and reputation took years to build. Years Madison's post couldn't erase overnight. Tuesday afternoon, Marcus called. Expected development. Terrence already knew what he meant. The social media stuff. Exactly. The attorney sounded unconcerned, which surprised Terrence. Marcus continued. People often think public opinion changes legal realities. It doesn't. No. A brief pause. Documents don't care about hashtags. Terrence laughed for the first time in days. The attorney continued. Let her talk. Terrence looked through the warehouse office window. Employees moved steadily across the loading floor. Business continued. Life continued. Then what do we do? Marcus answered immediately. The same thing we've been doing. And that's... The attorney's voice remained calm. We wait for the facts to reach her attorney. The line went quiet. Then Marcus added one final observation. The louder the narrative becomes, the harder the correction usually lands. Terrence ended the call. For years he had worked through nights while others slept. Now he was doing something similar again, working quietly, while other people talked. And somewhere across Columbus, Madison Harper was beginning to discover that stories could travel fast, but evidence traveled farther. The phone call came at 9:43 p.m. Terrence had just returned from work. A frozen dinner sat untouched on the kitchen counter. The apartment was quiet again. Madison hadn't spent a night there in nearly a week. Her side of the closet remained full. Her books remained stacked in the spare room, but physically she was becoming absent. Emotionally she already was. Terrence glanced at his phone. Madison. Again. For several seconds he considered letting it ring. Then he remembered Marcus's advice. Sometimes silence created more confusion than clarity, especially when lawyers had already entered the picture. Terrence answered. Hello? The explosion arrived immediately. Are you out of your mind? No greeting, no introduction, no attempt at calmness, only anger, raw and immediate. Terrence lowered himself into a kitchen chair. You should talk to your attorney. I'm talking to you. Her voice rose. This whole thing is insane. Terrence looked toward the dark window. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Outside, traffic lights reflected on wet pavement. Inside, Madison continued. You're trying to bill me for our relationship. Terrence said nothing, because the statement itself was inaccurate, and inaccuracies had a way of exposing themselves if allowed enough space. You helped me because you loved me. Still silence. You can't suddenly decide everything was alone. That statement interested Terrence, not because it was convincing, because it revealed strategy. Marcus had predicted something similar. The narrative was evolving. Support was becoming generosity. Generosity was becoming gifts. Gifts were becoming obligations. Definitions were shifting. The facts themselves remained unchanged. Madison continued speaking, faster now, less controlled. Nobody does what you're doing, Terrence finally answered. The agreement says otherwise. Silence, a sharp silence. Not because Madison had no response, because she hadn't expected him to mention it immediately. The signed agreement represented a problem, a significant one, not emotional, not symbolic, practical, documented, verifiable, real. When Madison spoke again, her voice sounded different, less certain. That document was never supposed to be used. Terrence almost smiled. There it was, the first honest sentence of the conversation. Never supposed to be used. Exactly. Neither of them expected it would matter. That didn't make it disappear. Contracts often became important only after relationships stopped working. That was their purpose. Terrence remained calm. It exists. You know what I mean. I do. The silence returned. Then Madison tried a different angle, a more personal one. After everything we've been through. Terrence looked around the apartment, at the furniture, the photographs, the life they once discussed building. After everything we've been through. Interesting phrase, because it sounded shared, mutual, collective. Yet the graduation banquet had told a different story. Publicly, clearly. After everything we've been through. The words arrived months too late, perhaps years. I think we're done talking about this, Madison laughed. A short, bitter laugh. You think you can win because you hired a lawyer? Terrence considered the question. No. Then why are you doing this? The answer came immediately. because it had never changed. Because facts matter. The line went quiet, completely quiet. Several seconds passed. Then Madison spoke again. Only this time the anger had disappeared, replaced by something colder. "You've changed," Terrence almost responded. Instead, he stopped himself. Because she was wrong. He hadn't changed. The difference was simpler. He had stopped ignoring reality. The call ended less than 2 minutes later. No resolution, no understanding, no reconciliation. Just distance, greater distance than before. Terrence placed the phone down, then returned to his dinner. Cold now, unappetizing. He ate it anyway. Years of warehouse work had taught practicality. The next morning, Marcus called. "How did it go?" Terrence summarized the conversation. The attorney listened, then nodded, even though Terrence couldn't see him. Expected, meaning Marcus leaned into professional explanation mode. "The narrative is shifting." Terrence had heard that phrase before. What does that mean exactly? "It means she understands documentation exists." The attorney paused. "Now she's trying to redefine the documentation." That made sense because facts rarely disappeared. People simply changed how they described them. Marcus continued. "Has she denied receiving the money?" "No." "Denied the payments?" "No." "Denied signing the agreement?" "No." The attorney laughed softly. "Then we're not arguing about facts. What are we arguing about?" "Interpretation." The distinction mattered. Terrence understood that immediately. Because interpretations changed constantly. Facts didn't. The following week brought another development. Madison hired counsel. Marcus expected that too. A response letter arrived, professional, carefully written, predictable. The attorney argued that Terrence's contributions had been made voluntarily, within the context of a romantic relationship, without expectation of repayment. Marcus reviewed the document twice, then set it aside, unimpressed. "That's it," Terrence looked surprised. "You expected more." "I expected better." The attorney opened the black binder, then tapped the repayment agreement. "This changes everything." Terrence remained quiet. Marcus continued. "Without this document, we'd be having a different conversation." He tapped the signature line. "But we have this." The attorney looked almost disappointed, as if the opposing side missed something obvious. Perhaps they had, because within days another request arrived: discovery, documentation exchange, financial verification, electronic communications. The process was becoming official, structured, methodical. Exactly the environment where Marcus thrived. Exactly the environment where Terrence's record-keeping became valuable. That weekend, social media turned uglier. A former classmate of Madison's posted a comment. Then another, then several. Rumors spread. Whispers multiplied. Most people lacked information. That didn't stop opinions. One anonymous account described Terrence as bitter. Another called him controlling. A third suggested he was trying to profit from Madison's success. Terrence read none of it directly. Co-workers mentioned it, friends mentioned it, Denise mentioned it, but Terrence avoided the comment sections entirely, not because they bothered him, because they wasted time. Marcus approved. "Good." The attorney sounded pleased. "Why?" "Because people lose cases in comment sections every day." The statement wasn't literally true, yet the meaning was. Public arguments created unnecessary risks. Emotional statements created evidence. Evidence created problems. Silence remained the better strategy. Several days later, Denise stopped by the apartment. She brought Chinese takeout, enough for 2 people. Terrence appreciated the gesture. They sat at the kitchen table, eating quietly. Eventually, Denise asked the question. "How are you really doing?" Terrence considered it, then answered honestly. "Tired." His sister nodded, not surprised. "Angry." Terrence thought about Madison, the banquet, the speech, the phone call, the social media narrative. Oddly enough, anger no longer felt accurate. "No." "Hurt." That answer took longer. "Maybe." Denise waited. Terrence stared at his coffee, then finally said something he had not spoken aloud before. "I think I already lost her a long time ago." The room became silent, because both of them knew it was true. The graduation banquet hadn't ended the relationship. It revealed the relationship had already ended. That realization hurt, but it also clarified. Denise reached across the table and squeezed his shoulder. No speech, no advice, no lecture, just presence. Sometimes presence mattered more. Monday morning brought another call from Marcus. Short, direct, important. The other side wants preliminary discussions. Terrence looked up from his desk. What kind of discussions? Settlement possibilities. That surprised him. The process had barely begun, yet settlement conversations were already appearing. Marcus sounded unsurprised. The documents are stronger than they expected. Terrence leaned back, thinking. The warehouse office buzzed quietly around him. Forklifts moved outside. Employees talked nearby. Normal life continued. Yet beneath that normalcy, pressure was building elsewhere, on the other side, where narratives were colliding with records, where assumptions were colliding with evidence, where years of carefully curated appearances were beginning to encounter documentation. Marcus spoke again. We're not there yet, Terrence nodded. I know. But they're starting to understand something. What? The attorney answered immediately. The binder is real. The line went quiet, and for the first time since the banquet, Terrence realized something important. Madison had spent years assuming nobody would ever audit the story. Now the audit had begun, and audits rarely cared about feelings. The deposition was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Nearly 7 weeks had passed since the graduation banquet. 7 weeks since Terrence stood at the back of a ballroom listening to someone else receive credit for years of sacrifice. The calendar had moved forward. The consequences had finally caught up. Terrence arrived at Marcus Bennett's office 30 minutes early, as usual. Punctuality was one of the few habits life had never punished him for. The black binder sat beside him. Its edges were worn now, pages marked, tabs highlighted, sections organized. Over the past several weeks, the binder had evolved from a personal archive into a legal weapon. Not because anyone altered it, because someone finally started paying attention to it. Marcus entered the conference room carrying a legal pad. You ready? Terrence nodded. The answer was honest. Not because he felt comfortable, because he felt prepared. Preparation and comfort were different things. Marcus appreciated that distinction. Remember something. Terrence looked up. This isn't about winning an argument. The attorney adjusted his glasses. It's about answering questions. Terrence nodded again. That part came naturally. Questions, answers, documents, facts. The language felt familiar. The deposition took place in a downtown office building occupied by Madison's legal team. Professional, neutral, quiet. Everything designed to remove emotion from conflict. Terrence appreciated that too. The conference room itself looked ordinary. Large table, leather chairs, water bottles, recording equipment. Nothing dramatic. Real legal disputes rarely resembled television. They resembled paperwork. Madison was already there when Terrence entered. For a moment, neither spoke. The last time they had occupied the same room was the apartment weeks earlier. Now attorneys sat beside them. The distance felt larger somehow. Madison looked different, not physically, emotionally, more guarded, more cautious. The confidence from the graduation banquet seemed diminished, not gone, just reduced. Across from her sat her attorney, a polished man in his late 40s named Daniel Mercer, professional, courteous, experienced. Terrence respected him immediately, not because Mercer agreed with him, because Mercer appeared serious. The deposition began shortly afterward. Formal introductions, procedural explanations, ground rules, then questions, lots of questions. Most were straightforward. Dates, timelines, living arrangements, financial records, relationship history. Terrence answered calmly, precisely, without embellishment. Marcus occasionally glanced toward him. The attorney appeared satisfied, because consistency mattered, and consistency became easier when truth required no modification. Hours passed, questions continued. Then the discussion shifted toward finances, the section everyone anticipated. Mercer leaned forward slightly. Mr. Cole, would it be fair to say many of these payments were made voluntarily? Terrence considered the wording. Yes, the attorney nodded, without immediate expectation of repayment. At the time, yes. Another nod. Mercer appeared encouraged. Then Terrence continued, because I believed we were building a future together. The room grew quieter. Not dramatically, subtly. Mercer adjusted direction. The answer complicated things, because voluntary support and shared future planning weren't mutually exclusive. The distinction mattered. Marcus knew it. Mercer knew it. Terrence simply answered honestly. The questions continued. Then came the emails. Boxes of printed correspondence sat stacked beside the table. Years of communication, years of promises, years of language. Marcus opened one binder, selected a page, then slid it across the table. Please read the highlighted section. Madison accepted the document. Terrence watched quietly, not her emotions, only the process. The email came from 4 years earlier, written during her second year of medical school. One sentence stood highlighted. Everything we're spending now is an investment in our future together. Madison finished reading. The room remained silent. Mercer immediately requested another document, then another, then another. Unfortunately for him, the language remained remarkably consistent. Future, partnership, marriage, us, together. The words appeared repeatedly, not once, not twice, dozens of times, perhaps hundreds. People often underestimated their own digital footprints. Terrence never had. Years earlier, he preserved everything, not because he expected betrayal, because organization felt natural. Now that habit was becoming increasingly significant. By early afternoon, another email appeared. This one created a noticeably different reaction. Even Mercer paused longer than usual. The message had been sent after a major tuition payment. Madison wrote, "I know I'll never be able to repay everything you've done for me, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying." The sentence hung in the room, simple, direct, powerful, not because it proved everything, because it contradicted the narrative developing afterward. Mercer carefully moved forward. The deposition continued, yet momentum had begun shifting. Everyone sensed it, even without acknowledging it. Around 3 o'clock, the signed agreement entered discussion. The agreement represented the most dangerous document in the entire case, not because it was emotional, because it was objective. Signatures rarely cared about feelings. Marcus presented the original copy, preserved, dated, witnessed. Madison examined it. Mercer examined it. Then questions followed. "Did you sign this?" Madison answered quietly. "Yes." "Was the signature yours?" "Yes." "Did anyone force you?" "No." Simple answers, simple questions, yet each answer strengthened the document. Terrence watched carefully, not because he wanted to see Madison struggle, because reality often emerged through accumulation. One fact, then another, then another. Eventually, patterns became impossible to ignore. Several hours later, Marcus introduced something unexpected, the audio recording from the graduation banquet. The room became noticeably still. Even Mercer looked surprised. Terrence wasn't. The file had existed since that night, preserved, stored, time-stamped, waiting. The recording played through conference room speakers. Madison's voice filled the room, clear, undeniable, just someone who helped out a little along the way. Silence followed. Long silence. Because context mattered. The sentence alone meant little. The sentence alongside 6 years of documentation meant everything. Mercer rubbed his forehead. Marcus remained expressionless. Terrence simply listened. The recording ended. Nobody spoke immediately. Finally, Mercer cleared his throat. "Let's take a short break," everyone agreed. Outside the conference room, Terrence stood near a window overlooking downtown Columbus. Traffic crawled through afternoon congestion below. People crossed intersections. Businesses operated normally. Life continued. A strange thought entered his mind. For years, he imagined justice as something dramatic, a confrontation, a revelation, a victory. Instead, justice looked surprisingly ordinary. Folders, emails, dates, spreadsheets, signatures. The truth wasn't arriving dramatically. It was arriving methodically. Marcus joined him. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then the attorney finally said something. "How are you holding up?" Terrence thought about it, really thought. The answer surprised him. "Better than I expected." Marcus nodded. "Why?" Terrence looked out the window. "Because the answer mattered." After a moment, he found it. "For a long time, I thought I needed people to believe me." The attorney waited. Terrence continued. "Now I think I just need the truth documented." Marcus smiled slightly. "That's usually enough." When the deposition resumed, the tone had changed. Questions became narrower, more cautious, less aggressive. The shift wasn't dramatic. Professional attorneys rarely revealed concern openly, yet the difference existed. Everyone in the room recognized it. By 5 o'clock, the session finally ended. People gathered papers, packed briefcases, exchanged formal courtesies. The legal process would continue. But something important had happened. The facts had entered the record. Officially. Permanently. As Terrence prepared to leave, he noticed something across the room. Connor Whitmore. The physician stood near the doorway, speaking quietly with Madison. Apparently, he had arrived near the end of the proceedings. Terrence had not seen him earlier. Connor's expression looked different now, more serious, more thoughtful, less certain. The man wasn't hearing rumors anymore. He was hearing evidence, and evidence had a way of changing perceptions. Terrence turned toward the exit. The day wasn't over. The case wasn't over. The conflict wasn't over. But one thing had become increasingly clear. The story Madison told publicly and the story documented privately were beginning to collide, and collisions like that rarely ended quietly. 3 days after the deposition, something changed. Not in court, not in the legal filings, not in the evidence. Those remained exactly the same. The change happened in the spaces between people, the places where reputation lived, the places where assumptions traveled, the places where facts eventually arrived. Terrence noticed it first through silence. A particular kind of silence. The silence that followed when people stopped repeating a story because they were no longer certain it was true. For weeks, Madison's version of events had spread freely. She was the successful young doctor. Terrence was the bitter ex-boyfriend. Simple, clean, easy to understand. People preferred stories like that. Unfortunately, simple stories often collapsed when complicated facts appeared. The deposition had introduced facts, lots of them, and facts created doubt. Doubt created distance. Distance changed everything. Monday morning began like any other. Terrence arrived at Great Lakes Distribution Center shortly before 7. The warehouse buzzed with activity. Truck schedules, inventory reports, forklift traffic, normal life. Predictable life. Terrence appreciated predictable things more than ever now. During lunch break, his phone buzzed. Marcus Bennett. Terrence answered immediately. "You sound happy." The attorney laughed. "Maybe." That alone captured Terrence's attention. Marcus rarely displayed emotion. Professional caution defined him. "What's happening?" The attorney paused, then answered. Connor Whitmore requested documents." Terrence frowned. "What kind of documents?" "The public ones." Terrence leaned back in his chair. For a moment he didn't understand. Then he did. Connor wanted verification. Not rumors, not explanations. Documentation. Interesting. Very interesting. Because Connor wasn't legally involved. He had no obligation to review anything. Yet apparently he wanted answers. Marcus continued. "Through appropriate channels, of course." "Why?" The attorney's response was immediate. "Because intelligent people eventually become curious when stories stop matching evidence." The line went quiet. Terrence thought about the physician. The confident resident standing beside Madison at the banquet. The man receiving applause intended for someone else. Connor always seemed calm, polished, certain. Now uncertainty had entered the picture. That mattered, not because Terrence wanted revenge, because uncertainty often marked the beginning of truth. Later that week, another development arrived, this time through Denise. His sister worked at Riverside Methodist Hospital. Medical communities talked, not officially, not maliciously, just naturally. Doctors discussed cases, nurses discussed doctors, administrators discussed everyone. Information traveled. Denise called Wednesday evening. "You busy?" "Not really." A brief pause, then she got straight to the point. "People are talking." Terrence wasn't surprised. "About what?" "You." Terrence laughed softly. "That narrows it down." "Not the way you think." Now he paid attention. Denise continued. "The deposition details are spreading." That surprised him. Not because information leaked, because professionals usually exercised caution. "What details?" "The financial records." Another pause. "The agreement. Then, the emails. Terrence stared out his apartment window. Night had settled across Columbus. Streetlights reflected on wet pavement below. "What are people saying?" Denise answered carefully. "The story isn't looking the way Madison wanted." That was an understatement, because the narrative relied heavily on omission. The evidence reduced opportunities for omission. One documented payment could be explained away. Hundreds could not. One supportive email meant little. Years of supportive emails meant something else entirely. The distinction mattered. By Friday afternoon, Marcus called again. This time, the attorney sounded less amused, more focused. "Connor left," Terrence frowned. "What do you mean?" "He left the relationship." Silence. Terrence wasn't expecting that. Not because it seemed impossible, because it happened sooner than expected. Marcus continued. "According to opposing counsel, the information settled slowly. Connor Whitmore, the man publicly introduced as Madison's rock, the man honored in front of hundreds of people, gone, just like that." Terrence said nothing. Marcus understood. "You're not celebrating." It wasn't a question. No, because he wasn't. Connor had never been the problem. The problem wasn't Connor. The problem wasn't even the relationship. The problem was deception, misrepresentation, rewriting history. Connor simply happened to be standing nearby when the truth arrived. The attorney sounded thoughtful. "I think he believed her." Terrence considered that. Probably true. Most people believe the information available to them, especially when presented confidently. Marcus continued. "Then he saw the documentation." Another pause. "Documentation changes people." That phrase stayed with Terrence long after the call ended. Documentation changes people. Or perhaps it revealed who they already were. The following week brought additional pressure. Not on Terrence, on Madison. The evidence continued expanding. Additional records surfaced. Archived communications, financial summaries, bank confirmations. Nothing dramatic, just accumulation. Truth often arrived through accumulation. One fact, then another, until denial became exhausting. During one legal conference call, Marcus shared an observation. "Her attorney's tone has changed." Terrence looked up from his desk. "What does that mean?" "It means he finally reviewed everything." The attorney sounded almost sympathetic. Terrence understood why. Lawyers preferred manageable cases, clear disputes, predictable risks. This case increasingly looked like a documentation nightmare, especially for the opposing side, because every new review produced the same result. More evidence, not less. The most significant moment arrived 2 weeks later. Settlement discussions had already begun quietly. Nothing formal, nothing binding, exploratory conversations, normal legal procedure. During one such discussion, Madison's attorney made an unexpected statement. Marcus later repeated it almost word for word. "He said your documentation is unusually comprehensive." Terrence smiled faintly. Years inside warehouses had finally become useful in a way nobody expected. Inventory systems, tracking procedures, verification processes. The habits transferred naturally. Every payment, every transfer, every receipt, everything preserved. Marcus sounded impressed. "Most people couldn't prove 10% of what you've proven." Terrence thought about that. Not proudly. Objectively. Because the attorney was probably right. Most people trusted memory. Terrence trusted records. The difference was becoming expensive. Across Columbus, Madison's professional world continued shifting. Not collapsing, not exploding. Shifting. Hospital colleagues became cautious. Friends became curious. Questions increased. Answers became harder. The problem wasn't scandal. The problem was credibility. Once credibility developed cracks, every statement received additional scrutiny. The process wasn't dramatic. It was gradual, which often proved more dangerous. One evening, Denise stopped by with coffee. The two sat on the apartment balcony overlooking the parking lot. Summer air drifted through the city. For a while, neither spoke. Then Denise asked something unexpected. "Do you know what bothers me most?" Terrence looked over. "What?" His sister shook her head. "Not the money." Terrence waited. "Not the lawsuit." Another pause. "The speech. The banquet. Of course, everything still traced back there, Denise continued. Because she had one chance. Terrence understood immediately. One chance, one microphone, one room full of witnesses, one opportunity to tell the truth, the easiest truth in the world. Instead, she chose something else. Neither sibling spoke for several moments. Finally, Terrence nodded. Yeah. That single word carried more weight than a paragraph, because despite everything that followed, the attorneys, the depositions, the legal filings, the settlement discussions, the true fracture occurred at the podium, the moment Madison publicly erased years of sacrifice. Everything afterward merely documented the consequences. As August approached, the case moved steadily forward. No explosions, no dramatic courtroom moments, just pressure, steady pressure, the kind pressure evidence creates. Then Marcus called late one afternoon. The attorney sounded unusually direct. They want serious settlement discussions. Terrence looked through the warehouse office window. Employees loaded freight beneath fluorescent lights. Life continued. Normal, ordinary. What changed? Marcus answered immediately. The same thing that's been changing all along. Terrence already knew. But he asked anyway. What? The attorney's voice remained calm. Reality finally caught up to the narrative. And for the first time since graduation night, Terrence realized the end might be closer than anyone expected. The first formal settlement meeting took place on a Tuesday morning. 3 months had passed since graduation night. 3 months since Terrence stood at the back of a ballroom and watched his place in someone else's story disappear. Now he sat inside a conference room overlooking downtown Columbus. No chandeliers, no applause, no speeches, just paperwork. Terrence preferred it that way. Paperwork rarely lied. Marcus Bennett sat beside him. Across the table sat Daniel Mercer and Madison Harper. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. The silence wasn't hostile. It was practical. Everyone in the room understood the same thing. The case had reached a crossroads. Continue fighting, or resolve it. Mercer opened the discussion. Professional, measured, controlled, exactly as Terrence expected. My client wishes to explore settlement. Marcus nodded. Go ahead. Mercer slid a packet across the table, numbers, schedules, terms, conditions. Terrence watched quietly. Marcus reviewed everything first, page by page, line by line. The attorney's expression never changed, which usually meant he was thinking. Finally, he closed the folder, then looked at Terrence. Would you like a few minutes? Terrence nodded. The two stepped into a private room. Marcus handed him the proposal. Initial offer. Terrence reviewed it. The amount was substantial. Not everything, but substantial. Structured repayment, multi-year schedule, financial acknowledgement, legal closure. Terrence set the papers down, then looked at Marcus. What do you think? The attorney answered honestly. I think they're scared. Terrence smiled slightly. Marcus continued. Not of court. Another pause. Of discovery continuing. That made sense. Because discovery hadn't stopped. Additional records continued surfacing. Additional communications continued appearing. Every new document strengthened the same narrative. Support, partnership, financial reliance, promises. The pattern never changed. Marcus folded his arms. They want certainty. Terrence understood immediately. Litigation created risk. Risk frightened people, especially when documentation remained one-sided. He looked back down at the proposal. The money mattered. Of course it mattered. Years of overtime shifts existed behind those numbers, years of sacrifice, years of delayed goals, yet something felt incomplete. What aren't they offering? Marcus almost smiled. Good question. The attorney pointed toward one section. Confidentiality. Terrence read it carefully. Then again. The language appeared straightforward. Neither party would publicly discuss settlement details. Neither party would make statements harming the other. Standard legal language, reasonable language, except for one problem, the practical effect. Terrence recognized it immediately. The provision created silence, and silence benefited only one version of history. Marcus watched him, waiting. Eventually, Terrence spoke. They want the story frozen. The attorney nodded. Essentially, because the public narrative still existed. The social media posts, the implications. The omissions. The carefully constructed version of events. Settlement would resolve finances. Not necessarily truth. The distinction mattered. Terrence sat quietly, thinking. For years, people assumed he reacted slowly because he lacked confidence. The reality was different. Terrence processed carefully. There was a difference, a major difference. The habit had saved him countless times. Now it served him again. After several minutes, he looked up. I don't need public apologies. Marcus nodded. Reasonable. I don't need statements. Another nod. Reasonable. I don't need revenge. The attorney smiled faintly. Expected. Terrence leaned back. But I'm not signing anything that requires me to support a false version of events. The room became quiet, because that was the core issue. Not humiliation, not anger. Truth. Simple truth. Marcus looked satisfied. That's what I thought you'd say. The two returned to the conference room. Negotiations resumed. Mercer listened carefully, then requested a short recess. Half an hour later, everyone reconvened. The process repeated itself. Offers, counteroffers, language revisions, structural changes. Hours passed, yet something interesting happened. The further discussions progressed, the less money became the focus. The real battle centered on narrative, how events would be characterized, what language would appear, what language would not. Terrence noticed it immediately, because for months he had been trying to explain exactly that. The issue wasn't dollars, the issue was history. Eventually Mercer sighed, removed his glasses, and spoke more candidly than before. My client would like closure. Terrence looked toward Madison. For the first time all morning she met his eyes. The expression surprised him. Not anger, not arrogance, exhaustion, pure exhaustion. The previous months had taken their toll. On everyone. The difference was that some burdens came from work, others came from evidence. Mercer continued. We believe resolution serves everyone's interests. Marcus glanced toward Terrence, then answered. Resolution requires acknowledgement. No one spoke, because everyone understood what he meant, not public humiliation, not public confession, acknowledgement. The room remained quiet for nearly 20 seconds. Finally, Madison spoke. Her first substantial contribution all day. Her voice sounded smaller than Terrence remembered. I never thought it would get this far. The sentence hung in the air. No one responded immediately, because there wasn't much to say. Eventually, Terrence answered. Neither did I. And it was true. Years earlier, when they signed the agreement, neither imagined this moment. When Terrence worked overnight shifts, he wasn't building a lawsuit. He was building a future. The lawsuit appeared only after the future disappeared. Madison lowered her eyes. For a moment, she looked less like a physician and more like the graduate student Terrence met years earlier. The woman studying alone in a coffee shop. The woman with impossible dreams and impossible bills. The woman who once believed they were building something together. The moment passed quickly, then professional negotiations resumed. By late afternoon, a framework emerged. Not perfect, not ideal, but workable. Substantial repayment. Formal acknowledgement of financial contributions. Structured terms. No admission of wrongdoing. No forced public statements. No requirement for Terrence to endorse false narratives. The agreement would close the dispute, legally, financially, practically. The final details took another week. Lawyers revised language. Accountants verified figures. Schedules were adjusted. Procedures finalized. Normal legal work. Unexciting. Important. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, the agreement was signed. No reporters, no audience, no applause. Just signatures. Terrence sat beside Marcus. Madison sat beside Mercer. Documents moved across polished wood. Pens touched paper. Years of conflict condensed into several pages. When the final signature was complete, everyone stood. The case was over. Almost. As people gathered their materials, Madison approached. Not dramatically, not emotionally. Simply walked across the room. Terrence looked up. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Madison finally said something. Not an apology, not exactly. More complicated than that. You kept everything. Terrence understood what she meant. The records, the emails, the receipts, the evidence. He nodded. Yeah. Madison looked down briefly, then back up. A strange sadness crossed her face, not because of the money, because she finally understood something. The quiet man she underestimated had been paying attention all along. Not plotting, not scheming. Paying attention. There was a difference. After a moment she nodded once, then walked away. No dramatic ending, no emotional reconciliation, no movie scene, just reality. Sometimes reality looked like that. Marcus finished packing his briefcase. Ready? Terrence looked around the room one last time. Months of pressure, months of preparation, months of uncertainty finished. He picked up the black binder. The same binder that started everything. The same binder nobody believed mattered. Until it did. Together, he and Marcus walked toward the courthouse exit. Late afternoon sunlight spilled across the steps outside, warm, bright, quiet. Terrence paused briefly at the top. Below, people hurried through ordinary lives, unaware of what had just ended. And for the first time since graduation night, Terrence felt something unexpected. Not victory, not satisfaction. Peace. Because truth had finally been documented. And sometimes that was enough. The strangest thing about peace was how ordinary it looked. Terrence Cole expected relief to arrive dramatically, a feeling, a moment, a breakthrough. Instead, it arrived disguised as routine. 3 weeks after the settlement, he woke up one morning and realized he had slept through the night. No legal deadlines, no attorney emails, no deposition preparation, no replaying old conversations, no wondering whether he should have done something differently. Just sleep. Simple, unremarkable, valuable. The realization stayed with him all morning. As he drove toward Great Lakes Distribution Center beneath a pale October sunrise, Columbus looked different. Not because the city had changed, because the burden had. For 6 years, Terrence carried Madison's future. For nearly 6 months, he carried the conflict that followed. Now, for the first time in a very long time, he carried only himself. That adjustment proved harder than expected. People often imagined freedom as gaining something. Sometimes freedom meant putting something down. At work, life continued. Schedules, shipments, inventory reports, employee meetings. The warehouse remained exactly as it had always been. Forklifts still moved through narrow aisles. Trucks still arrived before dawn. Loading dock still buzzed with activity. The difference existed inside Terrence. Co-workers noticed it. Not immediately, gradually. He laughed more, spoke more, stopped staring at his phone between tasks, stopped looking exhausted all the time. One afternoon, his supervisor, Rick Donovan, stopped by his office. Rick had worked logistics for nearly 30 years. A practical man, not overly emotional, the kind of person who measured respect through consistency rather than compliments. He leaned against the doorframe. "You look different." Terrence glanced up from a shipment report. "Different how?" Rick shrugged. "Lighter." The answer surprised him, because it felt accurate. Lighter. Not happier, necessarily. Not yet, but lighter, like someone who finally stopped carrying boxes that didn't belong to him. The settlement payments began arriving shortly afterward. Electronic transfers, scheduled, predictable, professional. Each payment reduced debts Terrence accumulated during years of supporting Madison. Credit cards disappeared first, then personal loans, then lingering financial obligations. The numbers changed quickly, faster than Terrence expected. One Saturday afternoon, he sat at his dining table reviewing finances, a habit he never abandoned. Spreadsheets covered the screen, monthly budgets, savings projections, debt summaries. For the first time in years, every category moved in the right direction. The realization felt almost surreal, because Terrence had become so accustomed to sacrifice that stability felt unfamiliar. He wasn't struggling anymore. Not financially, not emotionally, not legally. The adjustment required time. A month later, he moved. Not far, only a few miles. A quiet apartment near German Village, smaller than the place he once shared with Madison. Yet somehow it felt larger, because every room belonged entirely to him. No tension, no memories waiting behind every door, no unanswered questions. The moving process took a weekend. Denise helped. Several warehouse co-workers volunteered too. At one point, they stood inside the empty living room surrounded by boxes. Someone asked the obvious question. "What are you going to do now?" Terrence looked around. Fresh paint, new floors, new beginning. The answer surprised him. "I don't know." And that felt good. For years, every decision revolved around somebody else's future. Now, possibilities existed again. Real possibilities, not obligations disguised as plans. That winter, Terrence enrolled in a logistics management certification program at Columbus State Community College. The decision came almost accidentally. A warehouse executive mentioned it during a meeting. Promotion opportunities, leadership development, supply chain management, career advancement. Normally, Terrence would have dismissed the idea. Too expensive, too time-consuming, too impractical. Now those obstacles looked different. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't financing someone else's dream. He could finance his own. Classes began in January, 3 evenings each week, after work. The schedule felt demanding, yet familiar. Terrence knew long hours. The difference was purpose. Every assignment now benefited him directly. Every lecture built toward his future, not somebody else's, his. The concept took time to accept. Years of self-sacrifice had conditioned him differently. One evening after class, he sat alone in his truck reviewing notes. A realization struck unexpectedly. He enjoyed learning, not for career advancement, not for financial gain, for its own sake. The thought made him smile. Simple discoveries often arrived late. Several months passed. Winter became spring, then summer. Life settled into rhythm. Work, classes, family, sleep. Repeat. No drama, no crisis, no legal battles. Terrence appreciated the simplicity. One afternoon, Marcus Bennett called. The attorney rarely contacted him anymore, which immediately made Terrence curious. "Everything okay?" Marcus laughed. "Everything's fine." "Then why are you calling?" "Because I heard something." Terrence waited. The attorney continued. "Promotion opportunity." Apparently word traveled, even through legal circles. Terrence smiled. "It's possible." Possible felt safer than certain. Marcus ignored the caution. "You earned it." The conversation lasted only a few minutes, yet afterward, Terrence sat quietly for a while, thinking, because Marcus represented more than legal assistance. The attorney represented perspective, a witness, someone who saw the entire process unfold, someone who understood how far Terrence had traveled. The promotion eventually arrived. Operations manager. More responsibility, more leadership, better compensation, a larger office. Nothing extravagant. Enough. Terrence accepted immediately. Not because of the money, because of what it represented. Progress, movement, growth, his own growth, not borrowed growth, not reflected success, actual personal achievement. That distinction mattered. By late summer, another unexpected change occurred. People stopped asking about Madison, stopped discussing the lawsuit, stopped mentioning the settlement. The story faded, naturally, as stories often did. At first, Terrence found that strange. Months earlier, the situation consumed every conversation. Now, almost nobody cared. Then he realized something important. The case had never been the center of his life. It only felt that way because he was standing inside it. Once he stepped outside, perspective returned. Life expanded again. One evening, Denise visited the new apartment. The two sat on the balcony watching sunset colors spread across the Columbus skyline. Orange, gold, purple. The city looked peaceful. Denise sipped coffee, then smiled. "You know what I like?" Terrence looked over. "What?" "You don't talk about her anymore." The observation caught him off guard. Because she was right. Months earlier, Madison occupied nearly every conversation. Now, days passed without her entering his thoughts, not intentionally, naturally. The difference mattered. Terrence leaned back, watching sunlight disappear behind distant buildings. "I think that's a good sign," Denise laughed. "I think so too." The conversation drifted elsewhere. Work, family, classes, ordinary topics, healthy topics, future topics. As darkness settled across the city, Terrence felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation, not anxiety, not worry, anticipation. Because next month he would complete his certification program. Next month he would stand on a stage, receive recognition, celebrate achievement, his achievement. The ceremony wouldn't happen inside a luxury hotel ballroom. No photographers, no champagne, no glamorous speeches, just co-workers, family, friends, people who actually knew the journey. And although Terrence didn't realize it yet, that modest ceremony would mean more to him than anything that happened at Madison's graduation banquet. The ceremony took place on a Thursday evening in early September. No luxury hotel, no grand ballroom, no crystal chandeliers, just a modest auditorium at Columbus State Community College. 300 folding seats, a simple stage, a blue curtain backdrop, a podium positioned beneath bright overhead lights. Terrence Cole arrived 30 minutes early. Of course he did. Some habits never changed. He wore the same navy suit from Madison's graduation banquet. The same suit. The same tie, the same polished shoes. Yet everything felt different. Not because the clothing changed, because the man wearing it had. Terrence stood near the entrance holding a program. Students and families filled the auditorium slowly. Conversations echoed softly. Children ran through aisles. Parents searched for seats. The atmosphere felt warm, uncomplicated, real. No one was trying to impress anyone. People were simply proud. Terrence liked that. A voice called his name. He turned. Denise. His sister walked toward him carrying a grin wide enough to be seen from across the room. Behind her came 3 familiar faces: Rick Donovan, 2 warehouse supervisors, and half a dozen co-workers from Great Lakes Distribution Center. Terrence blinked, surprised. "You guys came?" Rick looked offended. "Of course we came." One of the supervisors laughed. "You thought we'd miss this." Another co-worker held up a paper cup. "I left work early for this." Terrence looked around the group. For a moment he couldn't speak. Not because the gesture was dramatic, because it was genuine. Nobody in that group benefited from attending. Nobody needed publicity. Nobody needed photographs. They came because they cared. The realization settled quietly. Then Rick handed him something, a small gift bag. Terrence looked inside, a miniature gold forklift mounted on a wooden plaque. The entire group started laughing, even Terrence. A metal plate beneath the model read, "From night shift to leadership." The gift probably cost less than $20. Terrence treasured it immediately, because value rarely came from price. The ceremony began shortly afterward. Graduates filled the front rows. Programs rustled. Phones appeared. Proud families prepared photographs. The college president delivered opening remarks. Then several instructors spoke. Nothing extraordinary, nothing dramatic. Yet Terrence listened carefully. Because unlike previous years, he wasn't sitting in an audience watching somebody else's achievement. He was part of it. That mattered, more than he expected. As names were called one by one, students crossed the stage. Applause followed each announcement, some loud, some quiet, each meaningful. Terrence waited patiently, the same way he had waited through years of night shifts, the same way he waited through legal proceedings. Patience remained one of his strongest skills. Finally, the announcer reached his row. A few more names. Then Terrence Cole. The sound echoed through the auditorium. Simple, ordinary, yet somehow powerful. Terrence stood, adjusted his jacket, then walked toward the stage. Nothing dramatic happened. No spotlight, no standing ovation, no emotional music. Just applause, real applause, the kind generated by people who actually knew the work behind the achievement. As Terrence crossed the stage, he glanced briefly toward the audience. Denise stood first, clapping, then Rick, then the warehouse crew. Soon several others joined. The applause grew louder. Not enormous, not overwhelming. Enough. More than enough. Terrence accepted his certificate, shook hands, posed briefly for a photograph, then returned to his seat. The moment lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet something inside him shifted, not because of recognition, because of ownership. This accomplishment belonged entirely to him. No ambiguity, no hidden contributors, no erased sacrifices, no rewritten history, just effort, his effort. The realization felt strangely liberating. The ceremony concluded an hour later. Graduates gathered for photographs, families crowded the lobby. Conversations filled every corner of the building. Terrence stood beside Denise and several co-workers near the entrance. Someone insisted on taking pictures, then another, then several more. The warehouse crew behaved like proud relatives. Rick kept telling everyone who would listen about Terrence's promotion. Terrence pretended to dislike the attention. Nobody believed him. Eventually, the group moved outside. The evening air felt cool. Streetlights illuminated the campus walkways. People drifted toward parking lots. The celebration slowly dispersed. Rick approached before leaving. The older supervisor extended his hand. Terrence shook it. Then Rick surprised him. Instead of letting go, he pulled him into a brief, one-armed hug, the kind men rarely admitted mattered. "You earned this." Simple words, nothing elaborate, yet they carried weight. Because Rick had witnessed years of effort, years of overtime, years of consistency, years of discipline, his opinion meant something. One by one, co-workers departed. Soon, only Denise remained. The two siblings stood beside Terrence's truck, the same truck he drove to work during the hardest years. The same truck parked outside the graduation banquet months earlier. Funny how much could change without changing at all. Denise looked at him, smiled, then asked a question. "How do you feel?" Terrence thought about it carefully. The answer deserved honesty. His eyes drifted toward the auditorium, toward the people leaving, toward the life waiting ahead. Finally, he answered, "Free." The word surprised even him, yet it felt right. Free. Not because the lawsuit ended, not because the settlement arrived, not because Madison disappeared, because he no longer needed anything from her. No apology, no acknowledgement, no recognition, nothing. That chapter had closed, completely. A few weeks later, Terrence received an unexpected email, short, professional, from Madison. The message contained only a few sentences, no emotional appeals, no attempts to revisit the past. Just one simple statement. "I hope things are going well for you." Terrence read it once, then closed the email, not angrily, not bitterly, simply finished. Some stories ended with reconciliation. Others ended with distance. This one ended with acceptance. Months later, while cleaning his apartment, Terrence opened a storage box. Inside sat the small gift box he carried to the graduation banquet. The one Madison never opened that night. The silver necklace remained inside, still engraved. "You did it." Terrence stared at it for several moments, then smiled. Because he finally understood something. The engraving had never belonged to Madison. Not really. Achievement wasn't limited to diplomas or titles or white coats. Sometimes achievement meant surviving disappointment without becoming bitter. Sometimes it meant choosing preparation over revenge. Sometimes it meant trusting evidence instead of emotion. Sometimes it meant rebuilding after someone erased your place in their story. Terrence closed the box, placed it back on the shelf, and turned off the closet light. The next morning his alarm rang at 5:30. A new day, a new shift, a new chapter. As sunlight spread across Columbus, Terrence walked toward his truck. Not as a man standing outside someone else's celebration, but as a man finally walking toward his own. Life has a quiet way of testing people. Not through dramatic battles, but through long seasons of sacrifice that nobody sees. Terrence's story reminds us that being overlooked does not make your contribution worthless, and being unrecognized does not erase the value of what you gave. Sometimes the people we help the most are the very people who forget how much we carried for them. That reality hurts. But the lesson is not to become bitter. The lesson is to remain honest, prepared, and grounded in truth. One of the most powerful parts of this story is that Terrence never won by shouting louder. He never won by humiliating someone online. He never won by chasing revenge. He won because he stayed disciplined when emotions could have controlled him. He kept records. He kept his dignity. And when the moment came, facts spoke more clearly than anger ever could. In life, patience often looks weak to people who only value quick reactions. But patience combined with preparation is one of the strongest forces a person can possess. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever helped someone build a dream, support a goal, or overcome a difficult season only to feel forgotten afterward? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience may help someone else who is going through the same thing right now. And if you enjoy stories about resilience, justice, quiet strength and ordinary people overcoming extraordinary challenges, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow's story might be the one that stays with you long after the video ends.